For me, it's interesting. When I was graduating from high school, I grew up in a community with a large Jewish population in South Florida, and I was a debater in high school and loved running around the country and meeting lots of other people and talking about big issues. And thinking about Jewish life in college was probably one of the last elements of priority for me as I was coming out of high school. And then something happened that changed that view, which was I spent a summer in Israel between high school and college. And in that summer, it sort of knocked me on my tuchus, because it really sort of made me feel I was putting my attention and my focus on a lot of external issues and concerns, and very little on internal questions that I hadn't yet confronted. And that summer in Israel led to a lot of questions. And so by the time I arrived on a college campus, I knew I wanted to experiment with some stuff like other students want to experiment. Except instead of experimenting with drugs and other things, I experimented with kashrut, and I experimented with an observant Shabbat, and I experimented with checking out different rabbinical seminaries, and I tried lots of different things and lifestyles, wearing a Jewish hat. And at the end of that experience of discovery, I changed my major to Judaic Studies major, and I read, and I would go to the library with a basket, the food baskets, and just pile books. And it was Buber, and it was World War II history, and it was the Shtetl, and it was Ladino, and I couldn't get enough of what it meant to be Jewish, both experiential, intellectual, spiritual, and I was trying all these things. And so at the end of that experience, I asked myself, what am I going to do? And I did what most or many Jewish youngsters with idealism and with interest. I went to law school. And I always wanted to go to law school, and I wanted to develop that, sort of advocacy skills. But all the time, I really sort of knew that there were pieces of me that I wanted to still probe. Probably the most core question I had in my mind for years of law school and then as practicing attorney was, should I be living in Israel? And by the end of law school, I asked my law school if I could spend my last semester of law school at Tel Aviv Law School. And on that visit, I pretty much recognized that I needed to answer that question only by going and spending time there. For me, living in Israel, my wife and I lived there for a stretch of about 8.5 years. I did lots of different things, sort of reinvented myself every few years by necessity. But for me, that what allowed me to bring together Am Yisrael, the people of Israel, Torah Yisrael, the study, and Eretz Yisrael, the land. And Jewish holidays were the calendar. The Jewish songs and music and expression were my kids in Gan. The people of Israel were my neighbors, some of whom I liked, some of whom I didn't, some of whose politics agreed with me, some of whose didn't, but we lived together. And sometimes we made Shabbos together, literally, we had Shabbos together, and sometimes we had a community asifah, and we had to disagree over where a fence was going to go or where something was, and we had to make Shabbos in the sense of the Jewish people living in a Jewish land with Jewish sovereignty and very mundane decisions. And that period of time, both when I visited the first time, not knowing anything, almost like a birthright student today, to the time that I spent there in college and law school as a formal student and started probing more, to the time I lived there, and now as a Jewish communal professional, bringing students there, participating and speaking on behalf of young people at Israeli seminars and conferences. To me, it's part of my blood. It's part of who I am today. It helps define who I am as a Jew, even not living in Israel today. Some of the traditions, some of the stories, some of the memories, some of the people who are so meaningfully today fill my stories with students, fill my reference points with colleagues, have helped me as a Jewish leader, as a Jewish manager. I spent 3 years working in the high-tech sector and teaching at the Technion. In those capacities, I saw an aspect of Israeli society that was inventive and innovative and contributed to a whole other side of my personal journey. So for me, I feel I'm getting more out of it than I'm giving back, frankly. Jewishness has helped enrich me. And if I can give back, and one of the things I love about my work, my wife constantly says she would not put up with my travel schedule if I were a lawyer. She does put up with my travel schedule now because she knows this is what I'm passionate about, and she knows this is what this is sort of how I found my Jewish journey as a college student. So the two have sort of bookended in an interesting way.